The cabin went silent the moment she yelled. "Typical behavior," the flight attendant muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. At just 10 years old, I didn't know how to defend myself, only how to hold back tears. I clutched my soaked notebook filled with math equations that had won me a spot at the national competition. All I wanted was to reach Washington, D.C. and show them what a kid from Detroit could do. But now, all eyes were on me. What no one knew was, one phone call from my mom would flip this flight upside down. And I wasn't the only one she'd wronged. The seatbelt sign hadn't even blinked off when the plane lurched violently, a shudder running through the cabin as overhead bins rattled and passengers gripped their armrests. My paper cup tipped over, spilling cold water straight onto my lap, and worse, across the carefully organized math notes that had taken me months to perfect. I gasped, trying to lift the wet pages off the tray table before they disintegrated. My equations, my diagrams, my proofs, all bleeding into smudged ink and dripping corners. I grabbed the tiny napkin from my snack packet and started blotting frantically. That's when she appeared, Whitney Cross. The blonde-haired flight attendant who had barely looked at me during boarding now stood at my row with narrowed eyes and a frozen smile. "What exactly is going on here?" she snapped. The couple beside me, a man in a sports coat and a woman clutching her pearls, both shifted uncomfortably. The water hadn't touched them, but they still leaned away like I'd spilled something toxic. "It was turbulence," I said quietly, holding up the soggy papers. My cup slid when the plane dropped. Whitney stared at me for a long moment before scoffing. "You need to be more careful," she said sharply, her voice projecting to the rows around us. "Honestly, some people—" She didn't finish the sentence, but the tone said enough. I felt my cheeks burn. Heads were turning. My wet lap, my trembling hands, my ruined notes, all exposed. "Can I have some napkins, please?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She sighed, rolled her eyes, and turned on her heel. A few seconds later, she returned, dropped 2 napkins onto my tray with a loud thwap, and walked away without another word. Across the aisle, a man in a business suit raised an eyebrow. A teenager with dyed blue hair peeked over her seat back. But no one said anything. I dabbed at the notes. Useless. The ink had run like watercolor. I couldn't even look up. I knew what they were thinking. Another kid who didn't belong here. Another messy problem. But what they didn't know was this. I wasn't here by accident. I had earned my place on this flight. I was on my way to the National Junior Math Olympiad in Washington, D.C., the only public school kid in the top 10. My mom had worked double shifts for 6 months to buy this ticket, and I was going to make her proud. Even if the flight attendant thought I was just another kid with a spill and an attitude. Even if she had no idea who she was messing with. When I close my eyes, I'm not on this plane anymore. I'm in our apartment, sitting at the kitchen table under a flickering light, scribbling equations onto the back of a pizza menu because we'd run out of printer paper. My mom, Monica Brooks, is napping upright on the couch, still in her scrubs from the hospital. Her shoes are by the door, soles worn thin from walking miles between patients. She worked 3 shifts a day for almost half a year, one at the ER, another at urgent care, and a third at the nursing home, where she covered nights because she said night pain doesn't get any quieter. All so she could buy me a one-way seat to Washington, D.C. I remember the night she handed me the ticket confirmation. She looked nervous, like she was scared I'd say it wasn't enough, that I needed something more money, more clothes, a better laptop. Instead, I stared at the email printout, blinking hard, because I didn't want her to see me cry. "This is real?" I'd asked. "You earned it," she said, kissing my forehead. "Now go show them what Detroit brilliance looks like." Most kids like cartoons or video games. I liked math. I liked numbers, because numbers don't lie. They don't whisper behind your back. They don't move away when you sit beside them. They don't call security because your skin's a shade too dark. Numbers treat everyone the same. And when the world around me felt loud or chaotic, equations were quiet, fair, predictable. I remember solving my first algebra problem at age 6. My teacher thought I copied from the back of the book. When she called my mom in for a meeting, I had to solve another problem on the whiteboard in front of her and the principal. I remember the way their mouths hung open when I finished in under a minute. That's when Mom started calling me her little professor. Detroit hasn't always been kind to us. We've lived in apartments where the water ran brown, walked past boarded-up schools and broken bus stops. I've seen kids way smarter than me fall behind because the world didn't give them a real chance. But Mom always said, "We're not waiting for chances, we're building them." So when I won the state math competition and they said I'd been invited to the nationals, Mom didn't hesitate. She just started picking up more shifts. I told her I didn't need to go, that we could wait. She looked at me and said, "Baby, brilliance doesn't wait. Brilliance boards that plane." So here I am, 10 years old, knees soaked with airplane water, notebook smudged, heart pounding, still holding on to her words, and still believing that numbers might be the key to something bigger than either of us. The woman to my right clutched her handbag tighter the moment I sat down. Her fingers curled around the leather strap like I might snatch it at any second. The man on my left adjusted his elbow on the armrest, careful not to let it touch mine. Neither of them looked at me, not once. I was in 17B, a middle seat of course, wedged between a couple in their 60s dressed like they were headed to a golf resort. The man wore a monogrammed sweater, gold watch glinting every time he checked his phone. The woman had pearls, perfume strong enough to sting my eyes, and a magazine about luxury cruises folded neatly in her lap. "Excuse me," I'd said politely when I first arrived, trying to get to my seat. The man had grunted and slowly stood. "Watch your step," he muttered. Once seated, I'd tried to smile, hoping it might melt the tension. It didn't. Now, with my notebook still damp and curling at the edges, I kept my backpack zipped shut on my lap, too nervous to stow it under the seat. My math notes felt fragile, like one wrong move might destroy what little remained. I wanted to ask for water, but Whitney hadn't returned since the spill, and when I pressed the call button, nothing happened. No one came. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I glanced up the aisle and saw her laughing with another passenger in first class. So I waited and held my silence. The woman beside me turned a page in her magazine. Her eyes flicked toward me, then away, like I was something she wished hadn't been placed between her and her husband. I adjusted my posture, kept my knees close, tried not to touch either armrest. I knew this feeling. It was the same quiet rejection I'd felt in waiting rooms, school assemblies, even elevators, when people shifted bags or bodies to avoid proximity. It wasn't always about words. Sometimes silence hit harder. I looked out the window, even though all I could see was cloud. I hugged my damp notebook tighter to my chest, like it could shield me. My mom always said, "People don't have to say a word to make you feel small, but don't let them keep you there." So I counted in my head. Primes, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 19. Somehow, numbers always made sense when people didn't. A snack cart rolled down the aisle. Whitney reached the row before mine. "Would you like pretzels or cookies?" she asked the man to my left. "Pretzels," he replied. She handed him a pack, then turned to the woman. "Cookies for you?" "Yes, thank you." Then Whitney's eyes landed on me, cold, dismissive. Without a word, she turned and moved to the next row. She hadn't even asked. I stopped hoping Whitney would notice me. Instead, I started watching her. Not in a mean way, just quietly, the way I observe number sequences or patterns in equations. Only this time, it wasn't about math. It was about people. A few rows ahead, a young Latina woman pressed her call button. I saw the light blink. I waited. Whitney walked right past, twice. When she finally stopped, it was only because a white man seated beside the woman flagged her down. "She's been waiting," he said, irritated. Whitney's smile appeared instantly. "Of course," she said to him, not to her. I watched the Latina woman's face. She didn't say a word, just nodded and looked down. 2 rows behind me, an elderly black man with silver hair and a pressed navy blazer asked for a blanket. I heard him, clear, polite, respectful. Whitney's face tightened. "We're all out," she said flatly, without checking. Minutes later, I saw her handing a fresh blanket to a young blonde girl in row 10. I knew this wasn't just about me. It was something bigger, something deeper. I started counting. Every interaction, every smile she gave, every one she withheld. The pattern was sharp, obvious, if you knew what to look for. Whitney didn't just dislike me. She treated everyone with dark skin like they were invisible, or worse, inconvenient. And the others? The ones who looked like her? She served them like royalty. But someone else noticed too. Lucas. He was a younger flight attendant, mid-20s maybe, with a soft voice and kind eyes. I'd seen him walking behind Whitney earlier, silent, hesitant. Now, as he passed by my row with the trash bag, he leaned down just slightly. "Doing okay?" he asked softly. I nodded, unsure what to say. A few minutes later, he returned with a small water bottle and a bag of cookies. He said nothing, just placed them gently on my tray. No show, no words, just kindness. I whispered, "Thank you." He gave a tiny nod and moved on. For the first time since boarding, I felt seen. My hands trembled as I opened the water bottle, more from emotion than thirst. This wasn't about snacks, or spills, or seat numbers. It was about dignity, about someone finally treating me like I belonged here. And that's when something inside me shifted. I wasn't just going to sit here and survive this flight. I was going to remember everything, because patterns, no matter how hidden, always reveal the truth in the end, and numbers don't lie. My backpack buzzed softly. I reached in and pulled out my phone, careful not to let it draw attention. A new message lit up the screen, from Mr. Grant, my math mentor. "Schedule shifted. Your presentation moved to 9 o'clock a.m. sharp. Let me know when you land." I read it twice, my heart kicking up. That gave me less time than I'd planned. I needed to mentally rehearse. I glanced around. A few people were scrolling through tablets or watching movies. Others were texting or flipping through photos. So I held my phone low and typed a quick reply. "Got it. We'll call after landing." That's when she appeared again. Whitney. Her shadow crossed my tray table. Her voice sliced through the cabin. "Excuse me, that phone should be off." Every nearby head turned. Startled, I looked up. "It's on airplane mode," I said calmly, holding up the screen. "I'm not—" "Doesn't matter," she snapped. "Airplane mode still transmits signals. It's a violation of FAA regulations." "That's not true," I said, trying not to sound defensive. "We're allowed to use Wi-Fi. The pilot said so at the start." "Are you arguing with me?" she barked. "I need you to surrender the device now, or I'll notify the captain." My throat tightened. I glanced at the couple beside me. Neither moved. The man avoided eye contact. "I'm not breaking any rules," I said again, my voice low but firm. "It's in airplane mode. I was just replying to my mentor. This has all my math work." Whitney leaned in closer. "You're being uncooperative. That's grounds for removal. Is that what you want?" My pulse pounded. I could hear murmurs now, whispers from behind. Camera phones clicking on. A woman 2 rows back said, "He didn't do anything." A teenager across the aisle started recording. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in his phone. Wide eyes, lips pressed tight. I thought of my mom, of her voice reminding me, "Stay calm. You are not what they think you are." I looked Whitney in the eye. "With respect," I said evenly, "I'm following the rules. My phone is on airplane mode. I'm happy to put it away, but I won't give it to you." Her jaw clenched. "We'll see what the captain thinks." She spun on her heel and stormed toward the front of the plane. The air around me turned heavy, electric. Everyone was watching, and for the first time, I felt the shift. People were no longer just silent observers. Now, they were witnesses. Whitney hadn't been gone more than a minute when the man beside me finally spoke. "That's enough," he muttered, voice gruff but steady. I turned slightly. He hadn't looked at me the entire flight, But now his gaze met mine. Clear, direct, and not unkind. "My name's Harold Bennett," he said, "and I've sat beside you this whole time." I swallowed, unsure how to respond. "You haven't raised your voice. You haven't broken a rule. You've done nothing wrong." Beside him, his wife, who had pulled her bag close earlier, placed a hand gently on my arm. Her voice shook. "I owe you an apology," she said softly. "I judged you when you first sat down. That was wrong. And now, this is beyond wrong." She turned, raised her voice slightly. "Excuse me," she said to the row across the aisle. "Did anyone else see what just happened?" Hands went up, nods, murmurs of agreement, and then a voice from the row behind us. Calm, measured. I did. A man stood. He wore khakis and a navy jacket, nothing remarkable, until he flashed a badge. "My name is Ronald Chase," he said clearly. "I'm a federal civil rights investigator assigned to monitor public service discrimination patterns. I've been documenting this flight since boarding." A collective gasp rippled through the rows nearby. Whitney hadn't seen his badge when she passed earlier. She hadn't known who was watching. But now, the truth had found a voice. "I've observed differential treatment across multiple passenger interactions," Mr. Chase continued, "including refusal of service, targeted accusations, and an escalating pattern of hostility directed specifically toward this young man." My breath caught. This wasn't just about me anymore. It never had been. "Rest assured," he said, turning to me, "this incident is being formally documented and will be reviewed at the federal level." People around us began murmuring more openly now. Phones lifted higher. Cameras zoomed in. Harold nodded, placing a steady hand on my shoulder. "You handled yourself better than most grown men would have," he said. "I didn't do anything," I whispered. "Exactly," he replied. "That's what makes this so ugly, and why you're not alone anymore." I looked around. Eyes were on me, yes, but not with suspicion anymore, with solidarity. What started as a quiet burn of injustice had just found its first spark, and it was spreading. My hands were still trembling when I reached for my phone again. I knew it was risky, but I didn't care. I needed one voice, just one, to ground me. I pressed Mom's name and held the phone to my ear. She answered on the second ring. "Elijah?" Her voice was hushed, breathless. I could hear beeping in the background, hospital monitors. "Mom," I choked. "She's trying to get me kicked off the plane. She said I broke rules, but I didn't. People are recording." A man stood up. He said he works for the government. He saw everything. There was a pause. Not silence. Just the kind of stillness that meant my mom had gone cold and laser-focused. "Baby, where are you right now?" "Still on the plane. We haven't landed. She went to talk to the captain. She said..." "She's not going to touch you," my mom cut in, voice low and fierce. "Listen to me. You stay calm. I'm at work right now, and I need you to do something for me." I blinked. "Okay." "I'm in a patient's room. Her name is Evelyn Dean." The name didn't register at first. "She's recovering from a cardiac procedure, and she happens to be..." There was movement on her end. I heard rustling, a faint voice in the background. Then my mom spoke again. "She's the wife of David Dean, CEO of Atlas Aviation." My heart stopped. The airline. My airline. "She's right here," Mom continued. "She's awake, and she just heard everything you said." "What?" "Hand her the phone, Monica," came a calm, mature female voice on the other end. There was a shuffle, a pause. Then a new voice, smooth and steady, filled my ear. "Elijah, this is Mrs. Dean." My throat tightened. "Yes, ma'am. I'm so sorry you're experiencing this. David needs to hear about it immediately. Stay on the line. I'm calling him now." Click. The call switched to hold. My fingers clutched the phone like it was life itself. People around me were still whispering, recording, but I barely heard them. Because somewhere, a woman whose heart my mother had helped heal was now using her voice to protect mine. Twist or miracle? I didn't know. But for the first time on this flight, something felt like it might actually go right. The intercom crackled, pulling everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've received an updated directive from corporate operations. We will no longer be diverting this flight. We've been instructed to proceed directly to Washington, D.C., as originally planned." A wave of confusion swept through the cabin. Heads turned. Passengers murmured. Several looked at me. Whitney reappeared from the front galley, her face rigid, posture tense. She moved with the precision of someone trying to maintain control while it slipped through her fingers. She didn't look at me. Not anymore. A few rows back, someone whispered, "Didn't she say they were diverting because of him?" "She said he was a threat," someone else added. "And now we're back on track?" The tension she'd manufactured was unraveling, and fast. Then, another announcement. This time, from a different voice. A deeper, firmer tone. "Crew, please be advised. An executive directive has been issued by Atlas Aviation's Office of the CEO. Effective immediately, Flight Attendant Whitney Cross is suspended from active duty pending investigation into conduct violations aboard Flight 263. The air turned electric. Whitney froze mid-step. Her hand hovered over the beverage cart. She stood still for 1, 2, 3 seconds, then slowly lowered her hand. Passengers stared. No one blinked. Even Lucas, the younger attendant, stood motionless in the back galley, his jaw slightly open. Whitney turned without a word and walked briskly toward the rear of the aircraft. Her footsteps, usually swift and confident, now sounded sharp and uneven. Someone began to clap, then another. It wasn't loud or celebratory, just steady, quiet, powerful. I sat still, not sure if I should join in. Then a woman leaned across the aisle. "That's for you, kid." My throat tightened. Lucas stepped forward, clearing his throat. "If anyone has further concerns about service or treatment during the flight," he said gently, "please document them. There will be an opportunity to report them officially upon landing." At that, a black woman 2 rows ahead raised her hand. "She ignored my call button 3 times, she said. An Indian man beside her added, "She refused me a blanket, said we were out, then gave one to the woman across the aisle." And just like that, the pattern became undeniable. This wasn't just about me, it was about all of us. The wave had turned, and it wasn't slowing down. Lucas approached me quietly while most passengers were still murmuring about the announcement. He knelt beside my seat, shielding his voice with the back of his hand. "I need to give you something," he whispered. I blinked. "Me?" He nodded and slipped a folded piece of paper into my palm. "Read it when you land, but know this. What happened today wasn't new." Then he stood and disappeared back toward the galley before I could ask anything else. My hands shook slightly as I unfolded the page. It was a printed email chain. Not from today, but dated nearly a year ago. Subject line: Repeated complaints, F.A. Whitney Cross. From Lucas Mendoza to Brian Cross, Flight Supervisor. I scanned quickly. The email outlined 3 separate passenger complaints citing Whitney for racially biased behavior, inconsistent service, and targeted hostility toward passengers of color. Lucas had reported the incidents directly to Whitney's supervisor, who, as I now saw in the email signature, shared her last name, Brian Cross, her brother. My stomach dropped. I flipped the page. Brian's reply was short, cold. Noted. Will address in training. Avoid further escalation. No formal action needed at this time. Below that, Lucas had responded with concern. He'd written, "We're putting people at risk by ignoring patterns. This is bigger than a training issue." No response followed. Until now, I leaned back in my seat, breath shallow. So Whitney had been caught before. People had spoken up. Lucas had tried, and the system, the one that was supposed to protect passengers, had protected her instead. not because she was innocent, but because her brother had the power to bury the truth. A cover-up, a pattern, a quiet corruption hiding behind company uniforms and polite smiles. The truth wasn't just uncomfortable, it was explosive. I looked around the cabin again, not with fear this time, but with clarity. This wasn't just a bad apple. This was a rotten branch on the tree. Passengers deserved to know. The airline needed to reckon with it, and now, thanks to Lucas, there was proof. A paper trail. I folded the email carefully and tucked it into my notebook, where the ink was still faded, but the truth had only just begun to sharpen. This flight started with silence, but it would not end that way. Not anymore. The next morning, the auditorium lights were brighter than I expected. Rows of folding chairs filled the room, each one occupied by students in pressed shirts and polished shoes. Their backpacks sat neatly beside them, their parents whispering last-minute encouragement from the aisles. But I stood alone. No one was holding my hand or patting my back. My mom was still in Chicago, working a double. I hadn't slept much after landing. Still, I clutched my notes, some pages still crinkled from the spill, and waited for my turn. "Contestant number 143, a voice called. I stepped forward. The judges sat behind a long table, each with a notepad and clipboard. A woman in a blue blazer smiled kindly. "Elijah Brooks, Detroit Public Schools. Welcome." I nodded, trying to control my breathing. She leaned in slightly. "Before you begin, may I ask one question?" "Yes, ma'am." "Why math?" she asked. "What made you choose it?" The question caught me off guard. I could have said something about numbers, patterns, future careers. But instead, I looked down at my notes and remembered the plane, Whitney's face, the email from Lucas. And then I looked back up. "Because math doesn't judge me," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "It doesn't care where I live or what I look like. Numbers don't assume I'm lying. They don't pull away when I sit next to them. They just work." The room went silent. I heard someone sniffle near the back. A woman in the front row dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Even the judges paused, pens suspended mid-air. Then the woman in the blazer gave a small nod. "Thank you, Elijah. Begin when you're ready." I turned to the whiteboard and started my presentation. It was all there. My prototype equation for water filtration, the cost-reducing variables, the community implementation model. I talked about neighborhoods like mine, where clean water wasn't a guarantee. I explained how my formula could bring change, not just in theory, but in real life. When I finished, I stepped back. The judges didn't clap. That wasn't allowed. But one of them whispered, "Wow." 2 hours later, they announced the results. "Elijah Brooks," the announcer said, "first place in the National Junior Mathematics Olympiad." There was a moment of stunned quiet. Then, an eruption of applause. I stood frozen, unsure what to do. Someone handed me a medal. Another judge shook my hand. But all I could think about was my mom, and how, somehow, through every injustice, every silence, every judgment, her son had just won. Because math didn't judge, and neither did truth. 2 days after the competition, my name trended on every platform I could think of. Justice for Elijah. Math over malice. The Elijah Protocol. I didn't post anything. I didn't even check most of it. I was still trying to catch my breath. But while I sat in my hotel room, sipping juice from a plastic cup, something bigger was unfolding. David Dean, the CEO of Atlas Aviation, called a press conference. Not a written statement, not a tweet. A full press conference, live-streamed from the company's headquarters. I watched it on a cracked tablet a competition volunteer had loaned me. He stepped to the podium in a dark navy suit, no tie, eyes steady. "I want to begin by apologizing," he said, voice firm but calm. "Not as a CEO, but as a human being." Cameras clicked. Journalists leaned forward. What happened to Elijah Brooks on Flight 263 was not just unacceptable, it was systemic. It reflected a failure not only of one person, but of a culture that tolerated silent bias in the air. He paused. The room was quiet. Then he did something no one expected. "I know what that feels like," he said, "because I lived it." Gasps rippled through the reporters. "When I was 11, he continued, I flew to visit relatives for the first time. I wore a suit and tie, trying to look like someone important, but the flight crew thought I was a runaway. They didn't believe I had a ticket. They called airport security when I landed." He looked up. "I was treated like I didn't belong, like I was dangerous. At 11, he let the silence linger. "And now," he said, voice strengthening, "I have the power to make sure it doesn't happen again." He raised a document in his hand. "Today, Atlas Aviation is instituting what we're calling the Elijah Protocol, effective immediately. Click, flash, click. It includes mandatory anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff, independent investigators for discrimination complaints, whistleblower protections, and the permanent dismissal of any employee found to violate passenger dignity based on race, gender, or background." He lowered the paper. "But more than that, it's a commitment. A reminder that every passenger is someone's child, someone's hope." Reporters erupted with questions, but David Dean didn't flinch. "This isn't about saving face. It's about doing what should have been done decades ago." I sat frozen, tablet still glowing in my lap. The CEO of the airline wasn't just reacting. He was reliving. And he was rewriting the rules, for all of us. It didn't erase what happened on that flight, but it meant it wouldn't be buried. And maybe, just maybe, it meant the next kid in row 17B wouldn't sit in silence. 6 months later, the world felt bigger, and yet, somehow, closer. Mom now had her own office at the hospital, with her name etched on the door. Monica Brooks, Director of Medical Services. Every time I visited, the nurses smiled at her like she was a hero. They weren't wrong. I had my own title now too, founder of Math for All, a scholarship and mentorship program for kids like me. Kids with big brains and tight budgets. Kids who deserved seats at the table, not just crumbs. The Elijah Protocol didn't stay local. It spread. Within weeks, other airlines adopted similar frameworks. Within months, the Department of Transportation issued new federal guidelines modeled after it. Airports began posting signs near every gate. Respect is not optional. Every passenger matters. Some people rolled their eyes at first, but others, especially those who had flown too long in silence, finally spoke up. One morning, as I watched the news, they ran a segment called Voices of Change. They played a video clip, a black grandmother boarding a flight. She paused, turned to the camera, and said, "My grandson told me I'm safe now because of a little boy with numbers." They showed a teacher in Georgia hugging a student who just received a Math for All grant. They cut to a round table of airline execs discussing new diversity policies. One of them said, "We owe a 10-year-old a lot more than a thank you." I didn't cry. I just smiled. Because numbers don't lie. Neither did what happened on Flight 263. Neither did the voices that rose up afterward. The funny thing was, people expected me to be angry, to stay bitter. But I wasn't. I was busy building something. Because Mom always said, if they don't give you a path, you draw one. And that's what I was doing. Equation by equation, voice by voice, seat by seat. At a community center back in Detroit, I now taught free weekend math sessions. The chalkboard was crooked and the ceiling leaked in the corner, but the room stayed full. One Saturday, a little girl tugged my sleeve. "Elijah?" "Yeah?" I smiled. "Do numbers really not care what color you are?" I knelt down beside her. "They don't," I said. "And someday, the world won't either." She beamed, and right then, I realized. This story wasn't about me anymore. It was about every kid who'd ever been made to feel small, and how sometimes the smallest voices echo the longest. Flight 263 had been just a journey, but what came after? That was the destination, and we'd only just taken off.